When a corrupt judge tried to humiliate Amanda Reynolds in his courtroom, he had no idea what was coming. Sitting quietly with her leather portfolio clutched tightly, she seemed like easy prey. But when he pushed too far, her unexpected legal brilliance left the entire courthouse speechless. Amanda Reynolds straightened her crisp white blouse and adjusted her neatly pulled back hair as she walked through the courthouse doors. Most lawyers arrived in groups, chatting confidently, but Amanda preferred to work alone. She had earned her law degree 15 years ago, but rarely took center stage in high-profile cases. Today was different. She was representing Eleanor Wilson, a 72-year-old widow fighting to keep her family home from being seized through what Amanda suspected was a fraudulent foreclosure. The opposing side was represented by Preston and Associates, one of the most powerful firms with connections throughout the judicial system. "You sure you're up for this?" asked Richard Barnes, her colleague who'd met her at the courthouse entrance. His weathered face showed concern. Amanda nodded. "Someone has to stand up for Mrs. Wilson. She'll lose everything if we don't." "Just be careful in there," Richard warned. "Judge Montgomery has a reputation. They don't call him the Hammer for nothing." Amanda had done her homework. Judge William Montgomery had been on the bench for over 20 years and was known for his harsh rulings, particularly against defendants challenging large financial institutions. What wasn't as widely known were his financial ties to several banks, including the one currently trying to take Mrs. Wilson's home. "I'm prepared," she replied simply, her voice betraying none of the anxiety she felt. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, imposing in their mahogany grandeur. Amanda took a deep breath and clutched her worn leather portfolio tighter. Inside was everything she needed: meticulously prepared documentation, precedents, and evidence that had taken months to gather. "Don't let him intimidate you," Richard said. "That's his favorite tactic." "I won't," Amanda promised. As they entered the courtroom, Amanda felt eyes on her. She recognized several attorneys from Preston and Associates, their tailored suits and confident smirks designed to intimidate. Their lead counsel, James Preston himself, was present, unusual for what should have been a routine foreclosure case. "They brought out the big guns," Richard whispered. "Why would Preston himself show up for this?" "Because something isn't right with this case," Amanda replied softly. "And they know I know it." Mrs. Wilson was already seated at the defendant's table, her weathered hands trembling slightly. Amanda gave her a reassuring smile as she sat down beside her. "Everything will be all right," she told Mrs. Wilson, hoping she was right. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Montgomery." Judge Montgomery entered the courtroom with the confidence of a man accustomed to absolute authority. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his black robe seemed more regal than those of his peers, and his piercing eyes scanned the room like searchlights. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber. Amanda observed him carefully. 65 years old, connected to the city's elite, and rumored to be considering a political run after retirement. Judge Montgomery wasn't just any judge, he was an institution. First case, Midwest Banking Corporation versus Eleanor Wilson. "Foreclosure proceeding," the clerk announced. Judge Montgomery's eyes locked onto Amanda, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. He had clearly expected the Wilson case to be handled by one of the senior partners at her firm. "Counsel, identify yourselves for the record," he instructed. James Preston stood, his voice smooth and practiced. "James Preston of Preston and Associates, representing Midwest Banking Corporation, Your Honor." Amanda rose next. "Amanda Reynolds, representing Mrs. Eleanor Wilson, Your Honor." "Ms. Reynolds," Judge Montgomery said, drawing out her name. "I don't believe I've seen you in my courtroom before." "I typically handle cases in the Eastern District, Your Honor," Amanda responded politely. The judge nodded, a thin smile appearing. "Well, I trust you'll find our proceedings straightforward. Mr. Preston, you may begin." Preston launched into his opening statement with the confidence of someone who'd already won. The bank's case seemed airtight. Missed payments, proper notification procedures, standard foreclosure protocols. Amanda listened quietly, taking occasional notes. To an observer, she might have seemed overwhelmed by Preston's polished delivery. In reality, she was picking apart every claim, identifying the discrepancies she'd spent months documenting. Thank you, Mr. Preston, Judge Montgomery said when the attorney finished. His tone was notably warmer than when addressing Amanda. Ms. Reynolds, your opening statement? Amanda stood, portfolio in hand. Your Honor, we contend that this foreclosure is fundamentally fraudulent. Mrs. Wilson's payment history shows no delinquency until the bank's computer system was upgraded last year. We have documentation proving all payments were made on time. Judge Montgomery's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation, counsel. We have the evidence to support it, Your Honor. I'm sure you believe you do, the judge replied, his condescension barely concealed. Proceed with your evidence presentation, but I advise you to be very certain before alleging fraud against a respected financial institution. Amanda nodded, unfazed. I'm quite certain, Your Honor. Amanda presented her case methodically, laying out evidence of Mrs. Wilson's consistent payment history. Bank statements, receipts, and electronic transfer records formed a clear pattern until 8 months ago when the bank's system suddenly showed 3 missed payments. As you can see, Your Honor, Mrs. Wilson's automatic payments continue to be withdrawn from her account, Amanda explained, displaying the bank statements. Yet, somehow, they weren't credited to her mortgage. Judge Montgomery looked bored. Computer errors happen, counsel. That hardly constitutes fraud. If it were just a computer error, the situation would have been corrected when Mrs. Wilson brought it to the bank's attention, Amanda continued. Instead, they added late fees, refused to acknowledge the payments she could prove she made, and fast-tracked the foreclosure despite her 40 years of perfect payment history. James Preston stood. Your Honor, while Ms. Reynolds' storytelling is entertaining, the facts remain clear. Our records show the payments weren't received. Perhaps Mrs. Wilson's evidence is the result of her own record-keeping errors. Amanda noticed Judge Montgomery nodding slightly at Preston's argument. Furthermore, Preston continued, given Mrs. Wilson's age and the documented early signs of cognitive decline in her medical records— Objection! Amanda interrupted. Mrs. Wilson's medical records aren't relevant to this proceeding and weren't subpoenaed or submitted as evidence. The courtroom fell silent. How did Preston have Mrs. Wilson's medical information? Judge Montgomery cleared his throat. Mr. Preston, explain how you came to possess the defendant's medical information. Preston hesitated. General discovery, Your Honor. No medical records were requested or provided during discovery, Amanda stated firmly. This represents a serious privacy violation and further suggests coordination between the plaintiff and external parties to build a false case against my client. The judge's expression darkened. Ms. Reynolds, that's an extraordinary claim. Are you suggesting impropriety by opposing counsel? I'm stating facts, Your Honor, facts that form a disturbing pattern. Judge Montgomery's jaw tightened. Watch yourself, counsel. Unfounded accusations in my courtroom can result in sanctions. Amanda remained composed. I understand, Your Honor. Good, the judge replied, because I'm not impressed by dramatic performances from inexperienced attorneys. Stick to provable facts. Several spectators in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably at the judge's tone. Amanda felt Mrs. Wilson's hand tremble beside her. Your Honor, Amanda said quietly, may I approach the bench with Mr. Preston? The judge waved them forward. As Amanda gathered her portfolio and walked to the bench, she could feel the tension in the courtroom rising. This was the moment everything would change. Your Honor, Amanda began once she and Preston stood before the bench, I believe we need to address several procedural issues before continuing. What issues? Judge Montgomery asked impatiently. First, the unauthorized access of my client's medical records. Second, the unusual speed with which this foreclosure was processed. The judge cut her off. Ms. Reynolds, foreclosures follow standard timelines. Not when they skip mandatory mediation steps and cooling-off periods, Amanda replied evenly. This case bypassed 3 required procedural stages. Preston interjected smoothly. Your Honor, given the clear evidence of default, the bank exercised its right to expedite proceedings under Section 4.3 of the mortgage agreement. Judge Montgomery nodded. That seems reasonable. Section 4.3 only applies in cases of intentional default or fraud by the borrower, Amanda countered. Neither condition exists here, making the expedited process improper. The judge's expression hardened. Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Preston has far more experience with banking regulations than you appear to have. I'm inclined to accept his interpretation. Amanda remained silent, and the judge seemed to take her silence as defeat. His lips curled into a slight smirk as he addressed the courtroom. "Let's return to open court," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps Ms. Reynolds can present actual evidence rather than procedural complaints." Back at their respective tables, Judge Montgomery continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ms. Reynolds, in my courtroom, we value efficiency and expertise. Do you have any substantive arguments to present, or should we conclude this matter?" The courtroom had gone completely silent. All eyes were on Amanda, who sat quietly reviewing her notes. Her perceived hesitation encouraged the judge further. "Mrs. Wilson deserves competent representation," Montgomery continued, addressing the courtroom as if giving a lecture. "Foreclosure cases require a thorough understanding of banking law. Perhaps a more experienced attorney from your firm should have handled this matter." A few attorneys from Preston's team exchanged smirks. James Preston himself maintained a professional demeanor, but his eyes revealed satisfaction at the judge's treatment of his opponent. Amanda finally stood, her expression unchanged. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter several documents into evidence." "Proceed," Montgomery sighed theatrically. "First, Exhibit A, Mrs. Wilson's complete payment history, certified by 2 independent auditors." Amanda handed the documents to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. Montgomery glanced at them dismissively. "Second, Exhibit B, internal communications from Midwest Banking Corporation discussing what they call Operation Harvest, a program targeting properties in appreciating neighborhoods owned by elderly individuals with significant equity." The judge's head snapped up. "What is this?" "Communications obtained legally through a whistleblower, Your Honor," Amanda replied calmly. "And finally, Exhibit C, financial disclosures showing property investments made through shell companies partially owned by several prominent individuals." Judge Montgomery's face flushed. "What exactly are you implying, counsel?" Amanda met his gaze directly. "I'm not implying anything, Your Honor. The documents speak for themselves." A tense silence blanketed the courtroom. Judge Montgomery stared at Amanda, his previous condescension replaced by something darker. "Ms. Reynolds," he said through clenched teeth, "approach the bench. Mr. Preston, you too." As Amanda gathered her documents, Mrs. Wilson whispered, "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Amanda assured her. "Just stay calm." At the bench, Judge Montgomery's voice was low and threatening. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" "Presenting relevant evidence in my client's case, Your Honor," Amanda replied evenly. "These allegations are preposterous," Preston interjected. "This so-called Operation Harvest document is likely fabricated, and these financial records, even if authentic, have no bearing on Mrs. Wilson's defaulted mortgage." The judge nodded. "I agree. Ms. Reynolds, I'm excluding these documents as irrelevant and potentially defamatory." Amanda had anticipated this. "Your Honor, respectfully, you cannot exclude these documents." Montgomery's eyes widened. "Excuse me? Federal Rules of Evidence 401 and 402 clearly establish that evidence having any tendency to make a fact more or less probable is relevant and admissible unless specifically excluded by the Constitution, federal statutes, or other rules." "I'm aware of the Federal Rules, counsel," the judge snapped. "I determine relevance in my courtroom." "Yes, Your Honor," Amanda continued calmly. "However, in Hutchinson v. Hensley, the Supreme Court established that evidence suggesting systematic targeting of vulnerable homeowners is always relevant in contested foreclosure cases." Preston frowned. "I'm not familiar with that case." 2018, Your Honor. Justice Kagan wrote the majority opinion." Judge Montgomery's face betrayed his own uncertainty, which quickly turned to anger. "Ms. Reynolds, if you're deliberately misrepresenting precedent—" "I would never do that, Your Honor," Amanda interrupted, reaching into her portfolio. "I have the relevant excerpt here." She handed the printout to the judge, who scanned it with increasing discomfort. Returning to her table, Amanda addressed the court. "Your Honor, I'd like to call our first witness, Michael Turner, former data analyst at Midwest Banking Corporation, and the whistleblower who provided the Operation Harvest documents." A man in his 30s stood up from the spectator section and walked toward the witness stand. "Objection!" Preston nearly shouted. "We received no witness list from opposing counsel." Amanda turned to him. Actually, Mr. Preston, I submitted my complete witness list 3 weeks ago. I have the certified mail receipt and the court clerk's acknowledgement. Mr. Turner was listed as witness number 3. The clerk nervously confirmed this. She's correct, Your Honor. The witness list was properly filed. Judge Montgomery's composure was visibly cracking. He turned to Preston. Did you receive this witness list? Preston hesitated. I would need to check with my team. Amanda spoke up. Perhaps Mr. Preston was too busy accessing my client's private medical records to review properly submitted discovery materials. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Judge Montgomery gavelled for silence, his face reddening. Your Honor, Amanda continued, before Mr. Turner testifies, I believe the court should be aware that the shell company mentioned in Exhibit C, Mountain View Properties, lists among its beneficial owners a William Montgomery. I'm curious if that's merely a coincidence. The judge froze, his gavel suspended midair. The courtroom collectively held its breath. These proceedings will be in recess for 15 minutes, he finally announced, his voice strained. Counsel for both parties in my chambers. Now. Judge Montgomery's chambers were opulently decorated with leather-bound law books, awards, and photographs of him with various political figures. The contrast between his hostile expression and the smiling faces in those photographs was stark. This is outrageous, he began once the door closed. Ms. Reynolds, you're walking a dangerous line with these unfounded insinuations. Amanda remained calm. With respect, Your Honor, nothing I've presented is unfounded. The documentation is extensive and verified. Judge, Preston interjected, this is clearly a desperate attempt to distract from the simple facts of the case. Mrs. Wilson missed payments. The bank has the right to foreclose. Amanda opened her portfolio again. If I may, I'd like to clarify several points. Without waiting for permission, she placed 3 documents on the judge's desk. First, the complete audit showing Mrs. Wilson never missed a payment. Second, internal Midwest banking communications specifically identifying her property as a harvest target due to its location and her age. And third, property records showing that foreclosed homes from this program were consistently purchased at auction by Mountain View Properties, often at 40% below market value. Judge Montgomery didn't touch the documents. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor. I'm demonstrating a pattern. The bank falsifies payment records for targeted homeowners, expedites foreclosures bypassing normal consumer protections, and then a shell company purchases these properties at deflated prices. The shell company's investors, including yourself, then benefit from substantial returns when the properties are redeveloped or resold. Preston's face had gone pale. Your Honor, this is absurd. Is it? Amanda interrupted, pulling out another document. This is your firm's billing record for operational consulting Project Harvest over the past 3 years. Your firm has billed over $2 million for work on this specific program. The judge stood abruptly. That's enough. This case is being reassigned. I'll recuse myself due to Ms. Reynolds' outrageous accusations. Recusal would be appropriate, Amanda agreed. However, reassignment won't be necessary. What do you mean? The judge demanded. As we speak, the FBI is executing search warrants at Midwest Banking Corporation, Preston and Associates, and Mountain View Properties offices. They're also seizing the banking records Your Honor attempted to seal last month in the Martinez case. Both men stared at her in shocked silence. I've been working with federal prosecutors for 11 months, Amanda explained. Mrs. Wilson's case isn't unique. It's one of 78 we've identified. I was specifically asked to handle this case because they needed someone the banking establishment wouldn't consider a threat. The color drained from Judge Montgomery's face. You were building a case all along. Yes, Your Honor. Your financial entanglements with Midwest Banking and Mountain View made you a person of interest early in the investigation. Your treatment of me today was predictable. A knock at the door interrupted them. 2 men in suits entered, showing FBI credentials. Judge William Montgomery, one said formally, we need you to come with us to answer some questions. Preston stood shakily. I need to call my attorney. That would be advisable, Amanda noted, though you might want to find representation outside your firm. As the FBI agents escorted the judge out, he turned to Amanda. You played us. Amanda shook her head. No, Your Honor, you played yourself. I just followed the evidence. When Amanda returned to the courtroom alone, confused murmurs filled the air. The bailiff looked uncertain without the judge present. Mrs. Wilson clutched her purse anxiously. "What's happening?" she whispered as Amanda sat beside her. "Justice, Mrs. Wilson," Amanda replied softly. Finally, justice. The courtroom doors opened again as two FBI agents escorted Judge Montgomery out, followed by additional agents leading a visibly shaken James Preston. The spectators erupted in shocked conversations. The court clerk, looking bewildered, approached Amanda. "Ms. Reynolds, what should we do about today's proceedings?" "I believe Judge Harmison from the Fourth Circuit is available to take over," Amanda suggested. "I've already spoken with the administrative office about the situation." As if on cue, Judge Eliza Harmison entered through a side door. In her 60s, with a reputation for fierce independence and ethical standards, she surveyed the chaotic scene with practiced calm. "Court will come to order," she announced, her authoritative voice immediately quieting the room. "I've been briefed on the extraordinary circumstances here. This court will recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., at which point we will restart these proceedings properly." As people began to exit, reporters who had somehow caught wind of the situation crowded the hallway outside. Amanda guided Mrs. Wilson through a side exit to avoid the commotion. "I don't understand everything that happened," Mrs. Wilson said, once they were in a quiet consultation room. "But I know you saved my home." Amanda smiled. "It was never just about your home, Mrs. Wilson. This scheme has hurt dozens of families. The evidence we gathered will help all of them." Richard Barnes burst into the room, his eyes wide. "Amanda, it's all over the courthouse. Montgomery and Preston taken out by the FBI. What did you do?" "My job," she replied simply. "But how? When? He stammered. "I've been working with federal prosecutors since last year," Amanda explained. "After I noticed the pattern in foreclosure cases, I took my concerns to them. They were already investigating the bank for other irregularities." Richard shook his head in amazement. "All those times I worried you weren't experienced enough for these cases." "That perception was useful," Amanda noted. "Being underestimated gave me access no one else could have had." Mrs. Wilson took Amanda's hand. "You're not what you seem, are you?" Amanda squeezed the elderly woman's hand gently. "None of us are, Mrs. Wilson. That's the lesson here." 1 month later, Amanda sat in her modest office reviewing case files. The aftermath of what the press had dubbed the Harvest Scandal continued to unfold across front pages nationwide. Judge Montgomery had resigned from the bench and was now facing federal charges for corruption, fraud, and racketeering. James Preston and 3 other partners at his firm had been indicted. Midwest Banking Corporation's stock had plummeted, and class action lawsuits were mounting. A knock at her door pulled Amanda from her thoughts. Richard entered, carrying a newspaper. "Still making headlines," he remarked, tossing the paper on her desk. The front-page story detailed how federal investigators had expanded their probe to 5 other states where similar foreclosure schemes had been identified. "The justice system works slowly, but it does work," Amanda replied. Richard took a seat across from her. "The partners want to talk about making you head of the new consumer protection division they're creating. Your name has become quite the asset." Amanda smiled slightly. "I'm not interested in being anyone's asset." "Then what are you interested in?" Before she could answer, her phone rang. She checked the caller ID, U.S. Attorney's Office. "I need to take this," she said. Richard nodded and left as Amanda answered. After a brief conversation, she hung up and gazed out her window at the city skyline. The U.S. Attorney had just offered her a position in their office leading a new task force on financial crimes against vulnerable populations. It was meaningful work that would allow her to help more people like Mrs. Wilson. Her computer chimed with an email notification. It was from Mrs. Wilson, with photos attached of her grandchildren visiting her at the home she had almost lost. The subject line read simply, "Thank you for fighting when no one else would." That evening, as Amanda cleared out her office, having accepted the U.S. Attorney's offer, she reflected on the events that had led her here. Judge Montgomery had seen a quiet woman he thought he could intimidate. He never suspected she had quietly built a case that would bring down an entire corrupt network. As she placed her law degree in a box, Amanda recalled the judge's words in his chambers. "You played us." She hadn't corrected him then, but the truth was simpler. She had merely been patient, thorough and unbending in her pursuit of justice. The corruption had exposed itself once someone was willing to look closely enough. Amanda turned off the lights in her office for the final time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready for them, quietly, methodically, brilliantly. Life teaches us that appearances can be deceiving, and judgment often clouds the truth. Has someone underestimated you, only to be surprised by your capabilities? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear about a time when you proved someone wrong through your actions rather than words. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and unexpected brilliance, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us all why we should never judge a book by its cover. Where are you watching from today? Let us know.